Top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Ahead of their long-awaited, long-anticipated showdown next month, Errol Spence says, we've got to make sure people remember Crawford fight like Leonard versus Hearns, with a glaring difference in the fights being that when Ray Leonard fought Tommy Hearns, they were in their mid-20s. Were they 26, at or around there, whereas Crawford and Spence are in their mid-30s. For us, we've just got to make sure how exciting it is on paper. We've got to make it exciting off paper. And when we get in the ring, Spence said, we've got to make sure that people are going to remember this fight, and people are going to talk about it how they talk about Ray Leonard and Tommy Hearns and all of the great fights 40 years ago. I want somebody, my kid, somebody else's kid, 20, 30 years from now, to watch it on YouTube. They're amateurs. They're watching our fight like, man, one day I want to be in a fight like that. Or one day, I want to be in the lead of a fight like that. And they have documentaries about me and Terrence and, how it occurred and, how the fight happened and what happened before the fight. So, it's a great moment in history. Fights like Ray Leonard versus Tommy Hearns, Felix Trinidad versus Oscar De La Hoya, those are fights that happened when the fighters were relatively young compared to Errol and Terrence. There's a genuine argument there that the fight should have happened years ago, the fight between Errol and Terrence, before his detached retina injury that benched him all of 2021 and before the car accident in 2019. This is not stuff I want to hear about after the fight. If Terrence Crawford goes in there and knocks this guy out, if he does, I don't want to hear about the detached retina or the car accident or the year in between fights, the year in between the Ugas fight and this fight, because all of this could have been avoided. Should have been. I have Terrence Crawford knocking out Errol Spence Jr., and that's been my pick, my prediction for years now, before the car accident, before any of that. All the other stuff just adds to it. Lends credence to the notion that he will, because styles might make fights, but there are also intangibles in play. They have an effect as well. Everybody's always given Terrence Crawford a hard time for the welterweights that he didn't fight, as if those welterweights wanted to fight him. I hear it all the time. Errol Spence Jr. fans disparaging Terrence Crawford's resume as if Danny Garcia wasn't made an offer by Top Rank to fight Terrence when he was. Yeah. And he chose to fight Adrian Granados instead. He chose to fight Ivan Redkach instead. It's a wonder that we're even here now. The subsequent 2 years that followed Keith Thurman's decision loss to Manny Pacquiao, what was stopping him from fighting Terrence? An overblown sense of self. I think they said he wanted something like $10 million for a Terrence Crawford fight. Hardly a realistic asking price and hardly the behavior of a fighter who wants to fight. Keith didn't want to fight, and neither did Danny. Everybody knows it. In spite of this, Errol Spence Jr. believes Crawford's power is overstated considering who he's fought. That's rich. Coming from him, he who fought a blown-up lightweight who moved up to welterweight on a whim and couldn't stop him or drop him. Mikey Garcia, who ahead of the Errol Spence Jr. fight had unified titles with then IBF champion Robert Easter. He won the fight, won those two belts, then decided he wanted to campaign as a welterweight in his very next fight. And even though it backfired, Errol beat him. But not how Gennady Golovkin beat Kell Brook, who jumped up 2 weight classes. Not how Canelo beat Amir Khan when he jumped up 2 weight classes, or Guillermo Rigondeaux, who was beaten by Vasyl Lomachenko, jumped up 2 weight classes. Those guys either stopped the smaller man or forced him to quit, whereas Errol, he couldn't do that. Mikey Garcia went 12 rounds, went the distance with Errol Spence Jr., so maybe he's projecting, and maybe it's his power that's being overstated. I don't think for a second Mikey would have went 12 rounds with Crawford. But he went 12 rounds with Spence. Spence, who said a little bit. When asked if Terrence Crawford's power is being overblown, he stopped everybody, but I'm not those people that he stopped. I feel like I'm way better caliber than the guys that he fought. He could say the same thing about you. That he's a better fighter than all the fighters that you've fought, the ones you've stopped in particular, and the ones you didn't. Those guys Errol Spence Jr. has fought so far are not 2-time Ring Magazine, 2-time Lineal, 3-division, current reigning champions. They were never undisputed. Crawford was. Pendulum swings both ways. Thinking about Terrence Crawford's power, we can look at Danny Garcia's fight with Jose Benavidez. Jose Benavidez, who he fought years, many years, after Crawford stopped him. When Crawford fought Jose Benavidez, he was an unbeaten fighter. And he stopped him. Years later, when Danny Garcia fought that same Jose Benavidez, Danny didn't. Danny didn't stop him. He spent quite a bit of time on his bike circling around that guy. Think about the Sean Porter fight. I said ahead of the fight, I said ahead of Errol Spence Jr.'s fight, he would not stop Sean Porter because this guy couldn't knock out Mikey Garcia. I picked him to win. I picked Errol to win the fight, but I didn't think he'd get the knockout, and he didn't. When it comes to Terrence... Immediately after Errol's fight with Shawn Porter, I stated right here on this channel in plain English that Terrence Crawford would be the only man to stop Shawn Porter. Those videos are up. All you gotta do is hit the search bar. It's still up. I'm no Monday morning quarterback. I think that Errol Spence Jr. is the one who's not the puncher that he's made out to be. That doesn't mean he can't punch. That doesn't mean he's pillow-fisted. That just means he's not Julian Jackson. That just means he's not the 147 what Artur Beterbiev is to 175. That just means that if anybody's power is being overstated, it's Errol's, not Terrence. Terrence, since arriving at 147 pounds, has quite literally stopped every single welterweight he's fought. All the same old excuses. We know what people are going to say, that Terrence fought a broken Brook, as if Brook wasn't already broken before he fought Errol. Broken by Gennady Golovkin in the course of 5 rounds. You're going to say that you don't give Terrence credit for knocking out Amir Khan because Danny Garcia knocked him out first, but Bradis Prescott knocked out Amir Khan before Danny Garcia. That's a fact. Years before Danny Garcia, so should we deprive Danny of credit too? Deprive Danny of credit the same way you're depriving Terrence of credit. And what about the Shawn Porter fight? Terrence stopped Shawn. Errol didn't. Terrence forced Kenny Porter to throw in the towel. That didn't happen with Errol. Happened with Terrence. Terrence stopped Jose Benavidez. Danny Garcia couldn't do that. And Danny's supposed to be one of these premier boxing champions, these premier welterweights, when all I saw is Terrence got the knockout and Danny didn't. Terrence has been the subject to unfair criticism for many years now. Unfair assessments. This is just one more. But Errol Spence Jr. very soon, late next month, will get to find out for himself what's overstated about Terrence and what isn't. He'll get to find out firsthand. A rare moment of clarity. A lucid moment for Oscar De La Hoya. De La Hoya backs Crawford to beat Spence, saying, "You don't have to be a genius to see Terrence is the better boxer." I don't often agree with things that Oscar says or does, but I agree with him on this one. I agree with this. In reference to his prediction, he said, "It hasn't changed because they haven't fought since I picked Crawford to win." I don't think anything has changed except they're getting older. They're both getting older as we speak, but I think that Terrence still has the ability, boxing skill, and IQ. You can see it. De La Hoya told Marcos Villegas in an interview on Fight Hub TV. "You don't have to be a genius to know who's the better boxer. Spence, don't get me wrong, he's a great fighter. We built him. Golden Boy built him. So Spence has a tremendous shot of knocking him out if he catches him. He has tremendous power and a tremendous IQ, but I think Crawford has better leg movement. He knows how to slip and slide, move in and out, and bounce on his toes and throw punches in bunches." It is true that Golden Boy, for a large portion of Errol's career, they were the ones promoting him, they were the ones building him. At least at the start they were. Many of those PBC fighters you see here today were Golden Boy Promotions fighters first, coached by both Richard Schaefer and Al Heyman and funneled to Al Heyman's PBC. Those are not delusions from Oscar, that's actually true. Golden Boy had their hand in developing Errol Spence as a fighter. You can't win a fight by throwing 1 or 2 punches. If Crawford is going to throw 4 or 5 or 6 punches, then obviously he's going to take the rounds and win the fight. I strongly feel that Crawford and Spence are both great fighters, but in my humble opinion, Crawford has the better ability. He has the better arsenal in the ring. Rick Glacier said something similar, citing the condition of Errol Spence Jr. In Rick's opinion, Errol's on the back 9. His speech is slurred. It's not immediately obvious to everyone because the last 3 years or so, we've barely seen Errol in action. Lest we forget, he only fought once in 2020, the Danny Garcia fight, didn't fight at all in 2021, and only fought once in 2022. 2 fights in the last 3 or 4 years. It's been a year since we last saw him in action, and according to Rick, based on how Errol is looking and how he's sounding, at least to Rick, he's on the back 9, and he's a punch-drunk fighter. It's not the craziest thing I've ever heard. That car accident that he was in could have killed him, you understand. He was ejected from that vehicle, and he landed on his face. His face hit the pavement. It's not hard to believe that might have had a lasting effect on Errol, a permanent one. But that's just how Rick feels about it. Maybe you feel different. Maybe you feel Errol, having not fought that much in the last 3 years, has had time to recuperate. In any event, he has no excuses. None to be made. If he didn't have a tune-up fight in between the Ugas fight and this fight, and that resulted in the accumulation of ring rust, Errol himself says he doesn't believe in tune-up fights. Errol himself said he didn't want to fight unless it was against Terrence. And if all that time passed...
That's on him.
Not saying that the same doesn't apply in reverse, that if Terrence were to lose, he doesn't have any excuses to make either. I don't think he does. He's fought in the last 12 months. He's been keeping busy, at least busier than Errol. So Terrence doesn't have any excuses to make either.
I just don't think he's going to have to.
I think he's going to win. I think he's going to use Errol Spence Jr.'s trademark aggression against him to catch him in between the punches, because Errol Spence Jr., as we all know, is an aggressive puncher and a volume puncher who opens up more than Terrence does.
Sets everything up off the jab, shoots the jab, steps into it, tries for body shots and uppercuts, hooks around the guard.
The fighters that he's fought and had success in those fights, those are more stationary targets than, say, Terrence Crawford. Danny Garcia, for example, ain't got feet like Terrence.
He's a good counter puncher, but he's got slow feet.
So when you want to step into your jab and put punches together on that guy, he's nowhere near as hard to find as Terrence Crawford. You think about Sean Porter. Sean Porter's another fighter you don't have to work too hard to find, because he's not going to move lateral, move away from the action. He's going to move into it.
He's a pressure fighter.
He's going to move towards it, towards the action, towards his opponent. He's another guy who you don't have to work that hard to find. He don't have the maneuvering capability of Terrence Crawford. Out of the orthodox stance or the southpaw stance on the good foot,
fleet of foot,
Terrence is going to put his foot in Errol's ass.
What Errol wants to do is draw Terrence Crawford out, draw him into exchanges.
But even in the exchange, Terrence Crawford is a better counterpuncher than Errol Spence Jr. What works for Errol is volume and aggression, more than counterpunching, more than punch-picking and sharpshooting.
Terrence is the sharpshooter.
In the pocket, I like Terrence Crawford's counterpunching over Errol's volume. Outside of the pocket, I like Terrence's movement.
His pivots and hooks on a turn.
His long-range punches. Errol Spence Jr. being eye-level to Terrence, you know, they've got approximately the same height, approximately the same length.
It'll take Terrence a few rounds to get his distance down.
That's actually normal. Characteristic of a Terrence Crawford fight, the first 2, maybe 3 rounds. He's not doing a whole lot.
Just getting his timing and distance down, studying the other guy to see what he's got.
Errol Spence Jr. is not a painfully difficult fighter to understand. He's a decent southpaw with a decent jab, good in the pocket, and a good body attack. Movement can offset most of that.
Movement and counterpunching.
Errol does actually get hit more than Terrence. Look at the punch stats. The punch stats from Errol versus Porter to Terrence versus Porter.
Errol gets hit more.
Even though I don't agree with most things that Oscar De La Hoya says or does, I do agree with him on this. I think Terrence is going to win. I think Terrence is going to stop Errol Spence Jr. North of welterweight at super middle and light heavyweight, WBA champion Dimitri Bivol says he's down to fight David Benavidez, but only after capturing more titles.
It won't happen.
A fairly formidable fighter in David Morrell, who only has 9 fights, has David Benavidez running scared, and you think he'd give Dimitri the time of day?
No way.
For Bivol, he's remained locked in becoming an undisputed champion at 175, but while getting more gold is the current target, Bivol acknowledges that a matchup against Benavidez would give the fans something to cheer for. It would be a great fight. Why not? Said Bivol to BoxingScene.com.
Because it took David Benavidez about 4 years to fight a guy on his same side of the street.
Because a fighter with only 9 professional fights has David Benavidez running scared. I don't think for a second the Benavidez people would entertain a fight with Dimitri Bivol for the aforementioned reasons, and because Dimitri is not a PBC fighter. Do you think David is about to leave the island?
He isn't.
Till further notice, Dimitri Bivol still is a matchroom fighter, fighting on the matchroom and DAZN side of things, not on PBC and Showtime.
This fight don't happen.
My goal is to fight for belts, Bivol said. Bivol will have to wait for the outcome of Better Beef's upcoming mandatory defense against Callum Smith, and that's his only hope now.
If Callum Smith pulls off this miracle and brings those belts back to Matchroom, where he can then unify with him.
It's his only hope, because if Artur wins, the belts stay on the top rank side of things, the situation remains complicated and undisputed.
Remains elusive.
Dimitri is in limbo right now, and he may fight only once this entire calendar year. With that being said, did he really make the right decision? Not boxing Canelo Alvarez on his terms.
Canelo's detractors would say that he did, that he was right to stand on his square 10 toes down, not acquiescing to Canelo. But what does he have to show for it?
And I heard something about them putting him in there with Dan Aziz. That's not a big fight. All the momentum that he amassed last year did not carry over into this one.
It's the truth.
Now Bivol says that he's open to moving down to 168 and fighting Charlo if he beats Canelo, and he looks to return in October. But if by some chance Charlo were to pull off that victory, he's not going to fight Dimitri Bivol.
No way.
Yeah, if Charlo wins, I would like that fight, Bivol told Fight Hub TV. It's not like, oh, I want to fight against someone at 168. No, I prefer to fight at my weight class. If someone wants, and we have a good offer to move down for belts, I will do it. But I prefer to fight at my own weight class.
It's not my decision to vilify Dmitry Bivol.
Not my intention. I'm just questioning their rationale, the decisions that they've made, and what happens now moving forward, because Dmitry seems to be in limbo.
All the momentum that he amassed last year has all but dissipated in this one.
I still favor him to beat Artur Better Beef if he can get him in the ring, but can he? Can he get Artur in the ring?
Bob doesn't seem pressed to make the fight. The WBC's standing in the way.
Dmitry says he expects to return to the ring in October, saying that September is too late for him at this point. Promoter Eddie Hearn has recently stated that he's working on a deal for England's Dan Aziz to face Bivol. Aziz is also in talks to face Joshua Buatsi, a former client of Hearn, in what would be an eliminator match for Bivol's WBA belt. I hope in September or October to fight again. October, Bivol said.
The only reason you saw guys demanding that the rematch happen at 168 as opposed to 175 where Canelo wanted it was for hate of Canelo, not for love of Dmitry.
If it were the other way around, and it were Canelo demanding that Dmitry move down to 168 and Dmitry insisted the rematch happen at 175, they would have went with that. They were just going with the opposite, whatever the opposite was.
Whatever Canelo wants, they're going to say they want the opposite.
They are childish and petulant in that way, and Dmitry Bivol himself in not fighting Canelo Alvarez on his terms.
Did he shoot himself in the foot? Because I don't see that many high-profile options for him out there.
I'm just giving it to you straight, because it's the only way I know how to give it to you, and the way I see it.
You know that Dmitry probably would have beat Canelo again at 175? He probably would have beat him again.
For a lot more money than he stands to make boxing Dan Aziz or someone else at this weight.
I don't think he made the right decision, I don't, but I'm not broken up about it either because I didn't want to see a rematch.
No, I didn't want to see a second fight. I felt in all likelihood Dmitry beats him again, thus there's no need for it.
Canelo's not a real light heavyweight, not a true light heavyweight. Dmitry has proven that, and they can go their separate ways.
But in analyzing his decision and his rationale, was it right for them to demand that the fight happen at 168 under different terms? It seems that they were wrong, because Dmitry's left in limbo, looks like he's only going to box once this year, and it won't be in a high-profile fight.
How is that a win?